Canada joins the EU in taking the U.S. to court over tariffs, while China defends the rules-based international trade system 17 years after its WTO entry. Could these help Washington think twice in pursuing a tariff-based policy? Our panelists weigh in right after this break.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines.
Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program comes to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. The U.S. remains at loggerheads with major trading partners. On Friday, Canada announced it will impose tariffs on about $12.5 billion worth of U.S. goods from July the 1st as retaliation for the Trump administration's steel and aluminum tariffs.
An eye for an eye.
Canada has no choice but to retaliate with a measured, perfectly reciprocal, dollar-for-dollar response. And that is what we are doing.
At the end of May, the Canadian Prime Minister announced that Canada will impose tariffs on imports of steel, aluminum and other products from the US, representing the total value of 2017 Canadian exports affected by new US duties, around $12.5 billion. It is Canada's strongest trade action since World War II. South of Canada's border, the U.S. Commerce Secretary is trying to stop the rise of steel and aluminum prices, saying these should not be higher than the import duties.
We are starting an investigation into that, trying to find out whether there are people who illegitimately are profiteering out of the tariffs. There's no reason for tariffs to increase the price of steel by far more than the percentage of the tariff.
Canada is the first among the major trading partners who pushed back against U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs after rounds of negotiations. Later this week, China will follow suit. But before that, China's taken steps to open up by lowering import tariffs and easing market access. According to the Ministry of Finance, China will cut import tariffs on items ranging from auto parts to daily consumer goods. For cars, tariffs and duties levied on nearly 140 items will be cut to 15%. The items cover passenger cars and certain trucks. Import tariffs on dozens of auto parts will be reduced to 6%. China will also cut by almost 9% the average tariff rate for over 1,000 taxable daily consumer goods, including clothing, home appliance and cosmetics. Earlier, China released a white paper on trade detailing the country's progress, commitments and contribution to the global economy.
Let's ask our panelists about what exactly is going on between the U.S. trade relations with some of its allies and certainly also with China. Liu Baocheng here in Beijing with us, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome, sir. In Washington, D.C., Steve Pruitt, managing partner of Watts Partners, who is also the former staff director of the Committee on Budget of the U.S. House of Representatives. What a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Pruitt. We haven't seen things are going to the positive direction much, and today we have heard once again Canada has already taken action. What would that mean for Washington? Mr. Pruitt, I cannot hear your voice. Go ahead now.
What it means for Washington is another day of our reality show that continues to look like chaos masquerading as trade negotiations. So unfortunately, this is going to continue. China is supposed to exercise their tariff changes the end of this week, and we will go into next week continuing this saga.
This is quite a saga, Professor Liu. Is Canada setting an example for the other countries to follow, following EU's reaction, of course, also to U.S. tariffs?
Well, definitely, I think Donald Trump has really invited a domino impact around the globe. And but Canada is really carrying a special meaning in two dimensions. Number one, it is part of the NAFTA, so very close ally. And more ironically, Canada actually suffered the U.S. trade surplus to them. So, and then what is really national security in the mind of Donald Trump? So, to use it as a pretext to really fight against his closest neighbor and closest ally and strongest trading partner.
But the thing is, Mr. Pruitt, I mean, we talk about the U.S. policy as if it was President Trump alone, but it's not. His constituencies are supporting him. His approval rating is continuing, remains stable, if not going higher. And you see that he's even working on a new piece of legislation, in a way trying to make the United States exceptional outside the WTO rules. So you see one after another measures taken by the United States. So the legitimate question, Mr. Pruitt, is the United States trying to establish an overall, a very different world order in which it is the only benefactor?
Well, I don't think you can attribute that kind of grandiose thinking to Donald Trump and his objectives here. I think until he actually spells out what making America great again means in the context of trade, everybody is trying to figure out what that means, not only abroad but here in the U.S. What I think you're seeing more than anything is an attempt by the president, as I've said to you before, to maintain a chaotic environment here in the U.S. That's the only way he really stays in charge. And because it's so undefined, but yet it is headline news every day, today's activity, yes, his supporters are going to support him because they see a man of action. They don't realize yet what those actions mean, and I think we're still looking at a gap between reality and perception here, and while it continues to close, that gap continues to close, it's going to close pretty hard on a lot of people who are supporting Donald Trump.
Maybe the U.S. is still confused, but for many from outside the country, things are getting ever more clearer, isn't it? And now I'm joined by, from Calgary, Canada, we invited Carlo Dade, who is director of the Center on Trade and Investment Policy of the Canada West Foundation. Mr. Dade, welcome to our program. Thank you for holding your phone like that in order to hear my voice clearly, sir. So tell me about your analysis in response to what Mr. Pruitt just said. Is this just one president trying to having a strategy, getting his political profits out of chaos, or actually this is really something of a very different direction America is gonna take?
Well, first, apologies for the Canadian technology. But yes, I would agree with the previous guest that, this is not What we're seeing in the United States is not the usual formation of policy, where you have experts in the administration working with experts in Congress and the bureaucracy to define goals and to get to them. We have policy made by tweet. But the combined effect of this policy is, in answer to your earlier question, yes, it is a major realignment of U.S. foreign and trade policy. What we've seen accumulating, the steps that have been taken, the result of those steps is an attempt to undermine the global trade order that the United States built and that the United States has benefited from. We saw this starting with the U.S. removal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, an attempt to destroy multilateral win-win trade around the Pacific and replace it with America-only wins. But we saw countries in Asia move to replace the U.S. leadership, and to the consternation of the U.S. administration, the TPP is very much alive, and it will probably come into effect, causing massive damage to the U.S. farm industry and others.
I see.
So the results of the president's not thought through actions are what you indicated, a major reformulation and a great danger to global trade.
Professor Liu, I'm not sure whether anyone is trying to replace the so-called U.S. leadership, as Mr. Dade just illustrated, but one thing is for sure, RCEP, for example, is already enjoying quite some progress in terms of a final realization. Already TPP, even though China is not part of it, but many countries are still holding dear that concept, at least that's a multilateral concept. So Professor Liu, will having a moral higher ground, as some of the other countries criticizing the United States these days, will that help eventually for the world to re-streamline a plan for the future while the United States is receding from the current system?
I think theoretically, yes. But at the moment, the global water has been stirred by Donald Trump, and for the sake that he could really fish from the troubled water. And until I think, number one, until we see a huge backfire within the United States politically and also materially, we do not really see that there's a strong incentive from U.S. at home to really to support the multilateral order. On the other hand, although many of those countries are being hurt by Trump's maneuver, but at the moment they still keep some slight hope. So that's why they propose to retaliate, but they still have a hope to really to negotiate for some better terms, for example, for exemption, etc. So I think until more clarity is being created, the world won't be, united.
Let me do a mini survey here among the three of you. So we got the EU already retaliate against the U.S. tariff on steel and aluminum with some anti-tariffs as well. And meanwhile, Canada already functioning, $12.5 billion. On July the 6th, when the U.S. levied 50B or 34B tariffs on Chinese goods, China is very much likely, as it promised, to retaliate as well. Will this be painful or at least pinchy enough for the U.S. constituencies to react and therefore policies to change? Let's have a survey now. Who said yes? Among the three of you, raise your hand.
I would say yes with time.
Wow, so only 1 out of 3 would say with all of these measures taken by the others against the U.S. tariffs, that there will be some pain inside the U.S. constituencies and things could change. So, Mr. Pruitt, tell me why you didn't raise your hand.
Well, I think first you have to put this in context. We're talking, I think at the max, the numbers that I've seen are somewhere around $200 to $300 billion, and we're talking about, in the U.S. economy alone, a $3 trillion economy. And that doesn't even get into the numbers when you start talking globally. So the magnitude of the impact here, I think, is somewhat limited. Secondly, I think because we've been talking about these tariffs now for several months, most of the people who are going to be impacted think they've already been hit. So they think whatever pain is apparent, they've already felt it, and they took 2 aspirins and a nap, and they're still functioning. So I think to say that the worst is yet to come to many of those people is premature. And then last, I would say that as we get closer and we continue to see the drain on the U.S. stock market, the business community in the U.S. is starting to raise their voices even louder now. There are many who would suspect that on this issue, and like has occurred on many others, Donald Trump will find a way to claim victory and move to the next chaotic episode of America under Trump. So I think for that reason alone, I'm not saying that there won't be any hurt, but most people think they've already felt it.
Okay. Mr. Dade, do you agree with your American counterpart that some aspirin and a good nap will help? Will that pain be affected?
No, I think the pain will be severe throughout the U.S. And I base this on a historical comparison. So back in 2002, when the Bush administration imposed tariffs on imported steel, they were forced to rescind or revoke those tariffs only 18 months after they were put into place. This was, I think, close to 2 years earlier than they were scheduled to end. The reason they revoked the tariffs was not because the WTO ruled against the U.S. No, the reason they revoked the tariffs was because of the domestic political and economic pain in the U.S. Those tariffs did not include Canada and Mexico, 2 of the U.S.'s biggest suppliers for steel. What we're seeing now is a much larger impact because you've included Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
So one would expect the U.S. public to react more strongly. But we now live in a post-truth or post-Trump world, and we've already seen the Trump administration spin economic damages from tariffs as a global conspiracy. Secretary of Commerce Ross was blaming the decline in soybean prices not on the result of U.S. actions, but he was blaming it on China and the global soybean cartel that was out to harm the U.S. So I think if this was 2002, when we were in the pre-Trump world, yes, the economic, but we live in a post-truth, post-Trump world, and the administration, something you'd never see before, spinning conspiracy theories to explain away the tariffs. I think his base will believe it, but it's unknown. We're watching history be made.
It is
no
unknown.
One's going to know until we
It
actually
is
see
unknown, and many say some of the comparisons might be irrelevant. Having said that, though, the question is, what can the others do? Professor Liu, right now the U.S. economy is doing extremely well. We all know that, even though the stock market over the past few days, as the tariffs and tariffs going on, would really suffer a bit. You see the red color throughout today's global markets. But Professor Liu, will that make a difference? You said earlier, you raised your hand. The question is how long? Well,
despite the fact that the U.S. Economy is strong enough, from my experience, after years of living experience in United States, I feel that Americans are more jitterish over any possible loss. If I buy clothes more expensively, if I use my cars in a more expensive way, they would really see this actual damage.
Well, they are certainly going to see it.
They would protest.
But the question is, sustainably, for a sustainable policy, what might be the thing that could really lead us to a healthier place? One final sentence from every one of you. Can we have Mr. Pruitt first? One sentence if you can, sir.
Well, I think, again, we've got to close this gap between perception and reality. Once that gap closes, then we'll be able to truly measure the impact of all of these decisions.
Perception and reality, Mr. Dade.
Congress taking back its trade authority from the president. Congress has given the president the authority to impose tariffs unilaterally. Congress can take that power back.
We wonder whether that is wishful thinking. Professor Liu?
Well, I think it is really high time for the world to join hands together to defend and further improve the effectiveness of the World Trading Organization.
A strong call coming from the Chinese side as well. Thank you so much, Liu Baocheng, Steve Pruitt, and Carlo Dade. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.